It's the Coogs versus the Cougs under the lights at Lavelle Edwards Stadium. The BYU Cougars need a win to keep their Big 12 title hopes alive. Can the Cougars of Houston, can they scuttle that plan? We're talking about all of it on a Locked On crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Cougs.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars and your resident BYU insider. That across from me digitally is our good friend Parker Ainsworth of Locked On Coogs. We are your host of, obviously, Locked On BYU Cougars and Locked On Houston Cougars on an everyday basis here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you once again for making it your first listen of the day. All right, Parker, I do want to remind everybody that FanDuel is, of course, sponsoring today's show. You can get started today with $150 in bonus bets if you make your first $5 bet hit. That's as simple as that. Go to FanDuel.com to get started today. All right, Parker, we got the Cougs versus the Cougs in the regular season finale. I'm just going to start here. Houston is a more fair weather climate this time of year than Provo, Utah is this time of year. And we're playing under the lights at 8:15 Mountain Time. That's 9:15 for those of you out there in Houston or in the greater Midwest area watching the Cougs versus the Cougs. How adapted is Willie Fritz's squad to playing in sub 30-degree temperatures?
Well, I can solidly say that they have not lost a game in sub 30-degree temperatures yet this year. So that's a good sign, right? That's a good sign. We don't throw the ball particularly well. So I actually think that it should be all right. Maybe I'm speaking too crazy. I will say it looks dauntingly cold there. Is this the coldest it's been for y'all all year? I know the weather can be a roller coaster sometimes, but
it's right up there. Here's the thing. We've had a pretty cold November, and the fact that we've had both home games in the month of November, if I recall correctly, have both been 8:15 starts, including also a game at Utah, your arch rival, in the same month, also an 8:15 start. BYU's been playing a lot of late night affairs, and it's been fairly chilly for all three of those.
Well, for reference, in Houston this Saturday, I just double-checked. It looks like it's supposed to be a high of 65, so considerably different.
Well, bundle up, Coug fans. If you're coming to Provo, get ready, everybody. It's gonna be chilly. And here's the thing: BYU's known for handing out ice cream to opposing fans when they make the trek to Lavelle Edwards Stadium. I would assume that option's still gonna be available for some Houston Cougar fans, but they may be frozen themselves and may not be so interested in that. Maybe they can interest them in like a Cougar Tail or something instead.
So I, generally speaking, ask a weird random question to start the show. And so for Locked On Cougars fans, they may not have heard that before. My question is, what is this Cougar Tail thing? Before we get into the football of it all, like what is this?
Good thing you asked. It is a supersized maple donut. It's I believe it's 15 inches in length, and it is, let's say, a literal mouthful to eat one. I will just say this. I love me some Maple Bar, Parker. It's one of my favorite donuts out there. That may be a hot take for some people, but I will admit, I can't finish a Cougar Tail in one sitting by myself. It is hefty. It is big. So if you're going to get one, if you're traveling out for this game, get a family member or a friend to share it with you. It's a supersized Maple Bar donut, and it's worth trying if you're coming out for your first time to Lavelle Edwards Stadium. It's one of the unique things about BYU and the game day atmosphere. But yeah, it's something I believe you need to share with a friend.
Speaking of sharing with a friend, let's talk some ball as friends. Okay. I have to say, Jake, you and I talked some this summer and had a good time. And I felt like we'd be coming to this game in the same place. Like, oh, let's just have a good time and end the season, see who can end it on a high note. And then up until about 2 weeks ago, I felt like BYU had very different things on their mind for this week's game. And now it's kind of weirdly a must win for BYU. Mm-hmm. And as quick as you can, I know your listeners have heard you every day. For Locked On Cougs fans, what's that roller coaster of a year? I mean, how'd you get here?
Well, that's a great question. Here's the deal. BYU's had the good fortune of a lot of bounces going their way as they started this season 9-0 and rose as high as number 6 in the college football playoff rankings. They were a top 10 team, and they were at the peak of their powers. Now, they have been brought back down to earth by virtue of the 2 losses they suffered the past 2 weeks against Kansas and then most recently against Arizona State. And there are a lot of people out there saying, see, we told you BYU was a fraud. Great. You can think that, whatever. The fact of the matter is, as you mentioned, a lot of us, yours truly included, believe that 6-6 was the benchmark for success coming into the season for BYU. The fact that they got to 9-0 and they're sitting at 9-2 with a good chance, I believe, of getting to 10-2 against Houston, that should be considered a banner year for BYU, especially in just their second year in the Big 12. And so, yeah, simply put, the bounces went BYU's way for a long stretch of this season. And yeah, the bounces have kind of gone the other way the last two games. But the fact of the matter is they can have a double-digit win season a year after they went 5-7 in their debut in the Big 12. Yeah, I think that's cause for celebration in Provo. Now, I'm going to flip it on you. Houston is one of the fellow teams that joined BYU and joined the Big 12 2 years ago. Now, after year one, Dana Holgorsen was dismissed. They bring in Willie Fritz. I will just say to Cougs fans out there, Houston Cougars fans, I am a huge fan of Willie Fritz's, and I believe that he will get this right in time down there in Houston. But for my fans at BYU, similar question to what you asked me. What's happened this season? Where do things stand for Houston at this juncture?
You know, Houston's sitting here at 4-7, officially eliminated from bowl eligibility after losing to Baylor last weekend. And I have to say, if you'd have asked anyone in July, you know, I think the highest hope was like a 6-6 bowl season. I don't think people were being unreasonable. Willie Fritz's first year, you lost a lot of talent in the transfer portal after the Holgorsen exodus. And frankly, you didn't win a whole lot of games a year ago. Schedule looked difficult, etc. There have been highs this year where I think that people looked at schedules, oh, wait a second, we've got a chance to make a bowl. It's like throughout the year that might have changed your perspective a little bit. I fully, you know, and I talked to Cam going into the game. I thought Houston was going to beat Baylor, right? And I thought Houston could beat Baylor, should beat Baylor. And the defense only gave up 2 touchdowns and scored ones themselves. Like I think the defense played well enough too. The offense has been putrid, and that's almost putting it nicely. Quarterback issues, blocking at the tackle issues, a lot of problems there. And really, I mean, they've had 4 games without a touchdown on offense. They've had 1 game where they scored in the like garbage time against the third string. And I guess they had 1 game against Oklahoma where they scored a touchdown against a broken coverage. Like it, you could argue that there's half the season without an intentional touchdown of sorts, right? And that's pretty bad offense. So it's been up and down like anyone else would say about college football. College football is just that kind of a sport, but you just don't know what you're getting on any given Saturday.
Well, I'll just say this on behalf of Cougar Nation out there from the BYU side of things. They want to give a digital high five to all Houston Cougars fans because for one thing and one thing only, y'all beat the Utes, and they will always, always be okay with a team taking down Utah and extending the misery of Utah football.
Yeah, that was actually one when I talk about like in July, it was kind of everyone chalked it up as a loss, and then as it got closer, like, okay, we can win this one. You know, we can beat a couple of these. You know, anyway, keep it going. So 2 defensive teams here. Yeah. It's gone a little bit better for y'all, and we're going to talk a lot more about this matchup specifically. But did you know going into the year that you had a defensive-based football team? Like, was that kind of what you anticipated? What'd you think about Retzloff, the BYU? Like, what did you anticipate coming in?
Well, I thought BYU's offense, frankly, was going to have to carry this defense a little bit because here's the deal: Jay Hill is a very good defensive coordinator. I thought, given time, similar to what I just talked about with Willie Fritz, he would get things right with BYU's defense. But the fact that they have been literally as stingy as they have this year, that's been a really, really fun thing to cover, but it was unexpected. I thought BYU's defense would be better than it was a year ago, Parker. This was the worst Power 4 team a year ago in overall sacks on the season. They had 11 sacks in 12 games a year ago. So literally they had nowhere to go but up. But to take the leap they did from one of the worst to what I believe is top 25 caliber on a good day defenses, that was not the leap I expected. So yeah, it's been a bit of a surprise for BYU. I thought there were going to be moments BYU's defense would have to carry this offense. The offense would have to carry the defense, excuse me. And there have been games, the Oklahoma State game comes to mind, that the offense did bail out the defense, but there's been long stretches of this season as well that the defense has also helped out BYU's offense. And I think they've been a beneficiary of having what they like to say complementary football this year. And that you can live where BYU's at right now. 9-2, ain't nobody in Provo or anywhere around here going to throw that back.
Not at all. In a second, I guess we'll talk more about like the specific matchup in this week's defenses and this week's offenses and so on. But I'm like you. I didn't necessarily know that the discrepancy was going to be as wide as it's been thus far. we should probably save that for the next segment, though.
So, hold that thought. We'll get to that momentarily because I do think there are BYU fans out there, Parker, that are utterly terrified that Houston could do what they did to Utah and scuttle all BYU hopes for the postseason. And we'll dig into that momentarily right here on this crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Coogs. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, get started this month and have some fun with our friends over at FanDuel, as they are America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. If you're sitting on the couch today watching some football and you want to bet on it, you can do it with our friends at FanDuel. It's really simple. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place your live bets on the NFL, and you can do it all in one place. When you get the hunch in the middle of that game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more to keep you up to date as you're placing those bets, and it's all on the same page. It's as simple as it can be. So just visit FanDuel.com, to join today. You'll get started once again with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. It's really that simple, my friends. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougs and Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. Jake Hatch here. That's Parker Ainsworth there. Big thank you to all of you for joining us on this Thanksgiving Day. By the way, I probably should have said this at the outset. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody out there.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah. So, enjoy your turkey day. I like to say it's the 3 F's of Thanksgiving around my part: family, faith, and football. And food also, I guess the 4 F's, I guess I should say there. And it's a good day. So hope you're having a great Thanksgiving whenever you hear and or watch this, because you may be watching it after the fact.
Here in Texas, faith and football overlap a lot.
Oh, good point. Yes. I've been told by more than one Texan that it's a religion down there. In football, so.
Totally. So speaking of football, this Saturday, these two teams face off. And you mentioned there's a lot on the line for BYU here. Obviously, your listeners know it. You've talked about it all week, I'm sure. For a Coug fan, a Houston Coug fan, what exactly is the scenario you need to happen? And then we'll talk about how Houston's going to mess it all up. But talk to me about what has to happen.
Okay, so simply put, BYU, by virtue of them losing, but also Colorado losing last week, their hopes of going to the Big 12 title game weren't dashed immediately. Had Colorado won and BYU lost, BYU would be playing for nothing at this point. It would just be, okay, we're looking at whatever bowl game. But because Colorado also lost, if BYU wins their game this week against Houston and then also needs a combination of either Iowa State losing to Kansas State in Farmageddon or Arizona State losing to Arizona in the Territorial Cup, both of those games, by the way, which will kick off before BYU and Houston play on Saturday night, one of those two results goes BYU's way. So long as BYU wins against Houston, they will be headed to Arlington to play in the Big 12 title game. It's as simple as that.
Well, and it's funny because, first of all, it'd be hard for one of those games to kick off later than this one does, I think.
Sure.
but you'll know at kickoff, I guess, what's on the line. And you mentioned that the kind of the surprise of going 9-0 and how it starts the year so strong and da-da-da-da-da. Are you worried, having come off of, a couple not so great games in a row? I mean, the defense has still, I think, been good in spots, and the offense has scored some touchdowns, but it has not been the same team for the last month. As someone, I'll talk why I've watched them a lot more this year in a second, but as someone's watched them actually kind of closely this year, I don't think that they look the same the last month. I don't really know what the deal is.
They have been thrown off a little bit, and I will just say this: playing your rival in the middle of a season, it does nobody any good, because trust me, you expend so much energy, emotional, physical, and everything in between into that game. BYU's been off since that Utah game. I've got no problem saying that. I think your observation is astute there, Parker. But the simple fact of the matter is BYU's got to get back to doing what they are doing. And I think the second half against Arizona State is more of what BYU can do. They held Arizona State in check, holding them to just 7 points in that second half after they fell behind 21-3. And had Jake Retzlaff been able to complete a wide open pass to JoJo Phillips, BYU very well may have won that game 30-28, and we're talking about one of the great all-time comeback wins in BYU football history, at least in recent memory. So it's a coulda, woulda, shoulda type conversation, but you're right. They've been off a little bit here, and they need to get back into the win column. And obviously, the last chance to do that in the regular season is here against Houston. And I know that BYU players, coaches, and everybody else involved with the program, they want nothing more than to get that 10th win and cement themselves as at least a candidate to go to Arlington, even if it may be taken out of their lap. Because if Arizona State and Iowa State win, it's all done. Those two are playing in Arlington.
Yeah, and again, some of that stuff you can't control at this point, right? And obviously, you and your fans will be watching those games very closely. I want to talk about why I watched BYU closely this year, and then give you a chance to explain what your thoughts are. I see BYU as very similar to Houston in a lot of ways, and so when I would watch like BYU play Baylor or BYU play Kansas State, as someone who's coached high school football for like the first 9 years of my career after college, whatever, like I looked at those games as like, okay, well, they have a strong defense. Their offense is, typically a little bit slower pace, et cetera. What did they do against those teams? Houston maybe isn't quite up to snuff at that position or this position, but, like similarly enough that they can have the same kind of game plan. Like, for example, they blew the doors off Kansas State. I was like, I think Houston's got a chance here. Houston beats Kansas State. They turned Baylor over some. Houston was able to turn Baylor over some and pick six and everything. They couldn't score against Baylor, but that's a whole different problem, right? So I guess my thought and my question for you is, with these two teams having fairly similar in broad terms skill sets, what is your thought? You mentioned if you feel very confident coming across the screen here. What is your thought going into the weekend?
I think just the fact that BYU, I think, got back to playing kind of the style they've been playing in that second half against Arizona State. I think they're hoping to parlay that into a full 60-minute performance. The first half was essentially a no-show against Arizona State. They got punched in the mouth, and literally it took till halftime in a certain profanity-filled tirade that got recorded without people's knowledge.
Yeah, we don't need to go into, but recorded anyway. That's a whole separate. That's its own podcast, right? That's a whole separate story.
Oh, trust me, we've talked about that on the podcast this week. Let's just put it this way: if you're privy to a conversation that doesn't involve you and it's two different parties, don't record it and put it on the internet. Let's just. That's the
broad terms.
the PSA for today. There you go on this Turkey Day. But yes, I think that they want to take what they did against Arizona State in the second half. The defense holds Arizona State in check. The offense gets going and really showed, I thought, signs of life that they had not shown for probably 2 or 3 games, maybe going all the way back to October when they got to 9-0. And they need to parlay that into a full 60-minute performance. So I don't mean to come off as brash or cocky about BYU's chances against Houston, but I just think that BYU, they're hurting a little bit, and they want to take out some of that hurt on their fellow Cougars. And that's I guess the main impetus of why I'm saying what I'm saying.
No, it makes a ton of sense, right? They got a lot to prove and a lot to play for still. And I can't tell if BYU being in a bowl game for certain and Houston not being in a bowl game, I don't know which of those actually helps more. And we'll talk about what we think the scores and predictions and stuff like that keys the game in the next segment. But the part of my confidence comes from, I think Houston's approaching this like their final stamp on the season, and not having a bowl game. If you listen to Willie throughout the week, I think actually puts more emphasis on this one than if they, were going into it with 6 wins. If they were, if they were 6-5 going into it, I think it'd be a little bit different. I think that's going to be said about ending the season on a high note, and I guess that's where I'm seeing this potentially.
Well, okay, let me insert this. This is Houston's bowl game. You're getting a lovely trip to Provo, Utah. We'll have snow-capped peaks for you. Should be pretty good in terms of overall views. You can go up to Sundance and have some fun checking out the peaks. And the stadium legitimately sits right at the foot of the Wasatch Mountains. I know that you're well aware of this, Parker, because you've been out here to Utah. But I think the bigger thing is Houston, as you mentioned, wants to go out on a high note. And what better way to go out on a high note than spoiling BYU's chances of playing for a Big 12 title game, and once again getting to 5-7 and showing that you can play against a top 25 ranked team and beat them on their home turf.
Exactly. And Houston knocked off Kansas State earlier this year, also top 25 ranked team. I think they were 17th in the country when that happened. If we're going to call the last game of the season a bowl game, I kind of wish we would bring in Hawaii. We can get Brett Yormark on that.
BYU's last losing season, Parker, 2017, the last losing season before last year. BYU's final game that year, a trip to Hawaii in early December.
Same kind of thing, right? Same kind of thing. But whatever the case may be, I do think that even if it's a player as simple as like wants to put out good tape because they're in the transfer portal, like I think guys will put more emphasis on this game because it is their final hurrah of the season. I just do.
Well, as they should, because here's the thing. guess what? We're in a professional sports market now, Parker. I hate to break it to anybody who thinks that this is still, quote, amateur sports. Folks, we're going to see rosters cut down to 105 players. There are more than 20 guys per team across the entire sport that are going to have their coaches tell them, hey, we love you, but your dream of playing here or playing college football potentially forever, it's over. And NIL, revenue sharing coming into effect next year. We're talking about professional sports because there's going to be salaries doled out. A left tackle's worth this much. A wide receiver's worth that. A quarterback is, as we have been told multiple times by multiple coaches, $1 million to $2 million. Geez, we're talking professional sports, Parker. And the days of yesteryear with college sports where it was this put one on for the old alma mater, that doesn't exist anymore. Guys have to put on for themselves because you mentioned they got to find their next landing spot potentially.
Well, and you hope that yields to like blocking a little bit harder, running a little bit faster. But anyway, I think that's one of the keys. And so maybe I'm prefacing the last segment a little bit too much, Jake, but I think that's important.
No, it is important because you're right. All these players have different reasons, and these two teams have different reasons. BYU is playing for a double-digit win season. They want nothing more than to be 10-2. That's a phenomenal mark to have as a Power 4 members, to have 10 wins under your belt. Meanwhile, Houston, they're playing essentially for pride's sake, but at the same time, also playing spoiler. That's plenty of motivation. And like I said, individual players have their own reasons for doing what they do. I'm looking forward to it. All right, so we will get more into some keys to the game, our predictions and the like. We'll do that momentarily right here on this Locked On crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Coogs. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Coogs your first view and or listen of the day. Of course, both these fine programs are available wherever you get your podcasts, also available on YouTube. Would encourage you guys to subscribe, rate, and review. And you know what? If you're feeling extra thankful this day, check out one of the shows. If you're a BYU fan, I'm going to tell my Cougar fans, get over and watch something from Locked On Cougs, and I hope vice versa, some Houston Cougar fans can do the same for BYU.
Yeah, I think it's, when you're in the Big 12 conference, checking out all your opponents, seeing what they're saying during the week. Basketball season for both these schools is about to be a pretty big deal. The BYU program is turning around in the present tense. The Igor guy's crazy. That's a whole different podcast. And so, yeah, there's a lot going on across the conference. Check out all the shows, Cougars included.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Park, you mentioned there that you feel like the motivation factor for both these teams could be a key to this game. I guess give me maybe one or two other keys that you're looking at from the Houston side of things going into this matchup.
I mean, Houston almost definitionally has to win the turnover battle. I know that sounds cliche. Every football team every week could say that. But they flat out just need the extra possessions on offense. They just do. And against Baylor, they needed the defense to score and probably could have used a second one. It's just the way this thing goes. If I look at BYU's deal here, my understanding is that they won 9 games, lost the last 2. Well, in the last 2 weeks, you've had Redsoff throw 3 interceptions, right? Like that doesn't seem like an accident to me either. It seems the kind of thing where if their defense is getting off the field, offense stays on the field, that's a good thing for them. So turning them over is going to be important. Some of that's like fumble luck, just how it bounces, and some of it's making a play on the ball when the ball's in the air. And so I think you got to be a little aggressive in those instances because your offense needs all the help it can get. And so that's my second one here. What other keys do you see as BYU is looking at this game? Because they've got to have the game.
Well, so Zeon Chriss, and forgive me if I'm wrong in saying this, seems to be kind of the breakout emerging star for Houston from this season. A dual threat quarterback, pretty modest statistics if you just look at it, but he hasn't played the entire season. He is your second leading rusher. He's also, once again, the starting quarterback right now for Houston. To me, it feels like BYU has had issues slowing down opposing quarterbacks that can run on them. I think it's a key. You got to keep Zeon Chriss in check if you want to make sure this game doesn't get out of hand.
I think that's fair. I think the biggest thing is that Zeon, at this point in his college career, and he's a sophomore, transfer from Louisiana Lafayette. At this point in his career, he's a lot better runner than he is thrower. We mentioned the weather at the top of the show. If he's successful running the football, given the weather, I don't know that they throw that at all. They've had some games they threw 11 passes and stuff like that. Like they might not throw it at all. Who cares about a forward pass?
Well, I'll just put it this way. Both teams, I'll just say this is a key for both teams, is controlling the time of possession. You want to dominate time of possession in this game. And BYU's got to really they like to ball control. If they can manage it, they will sit on that ball for 40 minutes of the game, and they'll be totally happy to do that. And if they can do that, they would love nothing more than to do that. But I think conversely, if Houston wants to win this game, they've got to come in here and at least have it be even in time of possession. Yes, you're right about the turnover battle. I think more often than not, that can sway games of this magnitude all the time. But Houston's got to come in and be able to prove that they can run the ball effectively and stay on the field, because if they're going 3 and out multiple times in a row, I can tell you Jay Hill and the BYU defense, they will be swarming Zeon Chriss and company.
Well, and so as I look across this defense, am I crazy to think that the better players are actually in the back half, the linebackers, the corners? That's who jumps off the screen to me, whether it's Jacob Robinson or whom, like those guys, I think, and this is, you watch them much closer than I do, are really good. I don't know if the defensive line has the same cachet. Is that because there's just so many more names, so many more people, or am I just wrong on that?
The way this defense is built is to emphasize the defensive line play needs to kind of win the day. And I don't think the defensive line has been as dominant as Jay Hill wants it to be, but I think it's going to take time to recruit the type of athletes he wants in that D line. He's kind of dealing with what he was left with the previous defensive coaching staff. And don't get me started on their recruiting practices. It was abysmal, just to use one word to describe it. So he's working with what he's got, and he's worked a miracle. Just zero doubt about that in my mind about what he's done. But you're right. The back end, that's where more of the stars are. I think BYU's best two defenders right now are the two of their linebackers, Isaiah Glasker and Jack Kelly. I will just say it right now. I believe both of them are next level players. They're both kind of play that outside linebacker position. I think Houston Cougar fans, you're going to see a lot of Isaiah Glasker, where he's number 16. It's hard to miss him. He's legitimately all of 6'5", 240 pounds. He can run sideline to sideline. He's a former safety in high school, and he
Time
is
out. 6'5", 240 pound. Like he played, like he was that big as a safety in high school.
He was all of 6'4", 6'5", but he weighed about $190, 200. He's packed
Still
on.
Giant.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I thought he was. I would have put him at wide receiver when he came to college originally, but the fact that he's packed on 40 pounds here, we're talking about a kid who has emerged as, I think, an absolute force. BYU's put a lot of good linebackers into the NFL over the last little while. Fred Warner, Kyle Van Noy, just to name two of the bigger names out there. I'm telling you, I think Jack Kelly and, more importantly, Isaiah Glasker, they're the next crop of linebacker talent to come out of BYU and go to the NFL.
I mentioned Retzloff as the quarterback, and he's calling himself the BYU, so I don't think anyone needs to understand that. That's what he's called. I'm not going for any jokes there. That's who.
There are t-shirts being made. Barstool Sports, Dave Portnoy's been all over it. Let's put it this way: it's a sensation at this point. The BYU is a thing.
And I hope he's making a lot of NIL money on it, frankly, because it's a clever thing to go about it, right? Who else on that offense, though? Because again, you watch him closer than I do, and I guess Chase Roberts, maybe.
Yes.
Like who else is worth keeping an eye on that side of the ball? Because it could come down to just scoring 2 touchdowns this week.
They've got 2 very good wide receivers, Chase Roberts and Darius Lasseter. They have been the 2 lead dogs for BYU, and they've been very, very good. They've got a great rapport with Jake Retzloff. When this offense is at its best, Parker, those 2 are just absolutely picking apart opposing secondaries, both in the short, intermediate, and long-range passing game. They will pop up in multiple spots, and Houston's got to deal with both of them because they're both equally adept at being game breakers.
I think Houston's got great wide receivers, and I struggle to get them the ball all year long. Pass game's been a problem, right? Yeah. I want to leave you with this because Houston has struggled in the pass game, like I said, all season long, whether it's turning it over or getting completions downfield or whatever, right? Do you really think, given the weather, given the defenses, frankly, given the late night, I don't know if that'll make it colder or not, even frankly. Do you think the passing game is going to be a big deal this week? Because I do think that in a indoor game, that would be BYU's advantage.
BYU practices in this weather all year long. The passing game is going to work. The only thing that could slow it down is if the weather is wet. Last I checked, it's supposed to actually just be a dry cold here. I know that sounds weird, but that's legitimately a thing. I know that humidity in Houston is ubiquitous. Guess what? It's about as non-ubiquitous here in Utah as you can find. So it's supposed to be just a kind of just a cold game. BYU, I think, they'll lean on their passing game because once again, the conditions in their mind shouldn't affect their ability to attack, especially in the passing game. We'll see if Houston, how that affects them. But I think BYU would love to have a very strong ground game, but they're not going to abandon the passing game simply due to the fact that it's in the 20s.
All right, give me a score.
I'm going to say BYU 31, Houston 20. I think that I think Houston will score a little bit. I do think that at the same time, pending how those results go ahead of this game for BYU, there could be a little bit of a letdown for BYU, but I do think they do enough to get that 10th win. What are you saying?
I'm going 17-14 Cougs, and okay. I want to be witty and leave it at that and let people guess what's going on.
Good job. Good job by you. All right. Well, Parker, on that note, where can people find your fine work?
Yeah, on X and all the good stuff like that at Ainsworth 512. I am on Blue Sky. I've heard y'all joke about me. I am on Blue Sky. I'm on the things. And then Locked On Cougs is every day, just like Locked On Cougars. Basketball season's in full swing. If you're new to the Houston Cougars, if you're just checking us out today, basketball's a big deal here. So we're into basketball season. Hoorah.
There are plenty of Cougar fans who are, speaking of BYU, that are in on this BYU basketball team. You mentioned Yegor Demon, Cannon Catchings. They got two guys who are legitimate first-round draft pick talent types on this BYU roster. That hasn't happened for multiple decades, and I can tell you, Cougar fans, they're excited to watch this BYU basketball team. So if you're a Houston fan who wants to get more of an in-depth look at my football takes as well as basketball, follow me on social media. I'm at Jacob C. Hatch on X. Like Parker, I am on Blue Sky as well. I actually got my preferred user handle there. I'm Jake Hatch, which is what I go by on Blue Sky. But also check out Locked On Cougars, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just Locked On Cougars. And as always, check out Locked On Cougars wherever you get your podcasts and also on YouTube. All right, Parker, thanks as always, my man. Have a blessed Thanksgiving. Thank you for joining me today. And thank you to both sets of Cougar fans here. This is fun to have them back together playing.
It's a lot of fun. Go Cougs. We can all say that part. Go Cougs, right?
We can't say that. Go Cougs for everybody. Have a great Thanksgiving, everybody. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Cougs your first view and or listen of the day. And thank you once again for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.